Welcome to the Haunted Hangover podcast. I'm Louie, and I'm joined by a special guest, a homie of mine, John, from the Scrap Metal podcast. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here. I am a fan of the show and just happy to be podcasting again. I haven't been recording in a little while. My co-host Chris is in the midst of buying a house, and I've been sick, so this is my first time back. Feels really, really good, and honored to be starting it up again this year with you.
Isn't it weird when you take like a break for a couple of weeks?
Yeah.
And then you jump back into it, you kind of forget.
You kind of forget, and then like to hear myself right now in the cans just having the radio voice going is very like, this feels like home. I'm glad to be back.
You're trying to tell me that's not your real voice? That's a radio
No,
voice?
no. I sound more like Gilbert Gottfried when I'm not recording. This is all a put on.
You know what's funny? I'm glad you mentioned that, fellow podcaster here. My wife says that to me sometimes. She's like, you put on a voice when you're recording, and that's not your voice. I'm like, really? I feel like I sound like this all the time.
Yeah, I'm a salesman. So my wife is like, your salesman voice is on, or your radio voice is on. I'm like, I didn't even catch it.
Voice gets a bit deeper.
Yeah.
You get closer
bit deeper,
to the mic. Yeah.
Bit silkier. A little bit more.
Less raspier. You articulate words a bit more.
Yes.
But yes.
Tip of the tongue.
Yeah. It goes with the territory.
Yes.
But yes, Scrap Metal Podcast. For my listeners, if they're not familiar, I'm familiar, but maybe they aren't. What exactly is Scrap Metal Podcast?
So the Scrap Metal Podcast was born of a desire to find new music. I am a heavy music fan. I grew up listening to the likes of Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Kiss, with my dad, and then I ventured into my own territory, come around Limp Bizkit time, Linkin Park, and then it went on to punk and hardcore and heavy metal and prog rock, and then I said, I'm going to learn jazz. So I spent 4 years studying jazz, and after that time, I found myself listening to the same 10 albums for like a good decade and a half. So my buddy Chris and I, who had a radio show in college, the Metal Crusade, we said, let's get back together and let's force ourselves to find some new music to listen to and also talk about the music that we love and why we love it. Let's talk about those classic albums. Let's talk about Anthrax every single episode and the Misfits every single episode. And so that's what the Scrap Metal Podcast was born out of. It's an opportunity for us to go over the tried and true albums that we absolutely adore, as well as doing some deep dives, which are always my favorite episodes, because we'll be able to go into pop punk, which like I was not huge on pop punk. I didn't grow up with that really. So I had to do a dive into that and like find stuff that I like or maybe I don't like and why. Like being able to explain why you don't like something. We did an episode on goth music, which I am all about. Chris is not a fan. And he was like, I had to find new ways to say this music sucks and I absolutely hate it and it's just Madonna but gloomier. So for anyone that's interested, yeah, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube now.
I love how you brushed over Limp Bizkit there. Some dark days. Some dark.
It was just one of those days, my friend.
Oh, God. Listen, I'll say this. $3 bill, y'all. Fantastic album. So, listen, I'm not, listen, new metal, and I think we're close in age, you and I.
Yeah.
Was a big part of my youth, I guess. When I was like 11, 12. New metal's come up on the show. Chris, one of my co-hosts here at Haunted Hangover, big new metal butt rock guy.
Yeah.
His taste in music is peculiar. I don't know. There's some choices. I'm like, dude, really? You like this shit? Like, there's some like, when it comes to new metal, there's some, Slipknot. Everyone likes fucking Slipknot, Korn, and stuff like that. But he'll pull out some like weird band that like 3 people listened to in 1999. And I'm like, dude, really?
What do you mean you never listened to Spine Shank?
What do you mean this garbage ass band that everyone liked? And it's bizarre. Yeah, it's so funny too. And I know we're going off on a little tangent here, but that whole thing is coming back with the kids. I'm noticing that.
Oh, yeah.
It's the big pants and like the Jankos and like new. And I'll be honest, I've listened to some of the newer metal. I'm curious your take on this. I've listened to some of these like newer new metal bands. Obviously, that was the influence. And a lot of them are just as shitty as the ones from 1999, 2000. It's hilarious. Like, have you checked out any of like these new bands that are mimicking what all like older bands were doing, 25 years ago? Have you checked any of them out?
Absolutely. There's a band called Tetrarch that
Okay.
is very much doing like the Korn, Disturbed,
Oh God.
almost like a Drowning Pool sort of thing. And you can hear it in the vocals. The music is great. The music, I
Okay.
think, is phenomenal. And like for me, like with horror, you get your gateway and you have a band that will open you up to these things. So like a band like Tetrarch or a band like Dropout Kings, who anyone that I show them to, they were just like, oh, this is just like Suicide Boys or Ghost Main. And I'm like, all right, fine, but this harkens back to like Limp Bizkit and Fred Durst days for me. Like
Yeah.
my draw for Limp Bizkit was Wes Borland. All the makeup and all the characters that he would put on. If not for that, I would have not gotten into like makeup effects and like starting to look into that kind of stuff. And, I wouldn't have found Kubla Khan and Killswitch Engage or stuff like that had it not been for Limp Bizkit. So I've got to give him a fair amount of credit in that, in that respect.
For sure, dude. Even for me, when I was whatever, 12, 13, those bands like Korn, and I was always more into like Korn and Slipknot and fucking Static X and shit like that. When I was like 12 years old. And like that is what kind of got me into like as you continue listening to more music, you discover like hardcore, which I was really into, and being from New York, and like, I got into hardcore when I was a teenager. And then that's kind of like took over. I was like, oh, these bands suck. And I'm only into like Cro-Mags now and like Madball. And then, and then you discover death metal, black metal, and stuff like that. So I agree. It's all kind of like gateway. And I'm sure kids now that listen to like a lot of these really questionable bands that are popular, they'll eventually find kind of better groups.
It's all about what introduces you to it and like what is your gateway into it. So it's like it can be something that you laugh about or you hold dear, like Wisconsin Death Trip. It's a whole album about being from Wisconsin and Ed Gein being your neighbor. So I love that.
That album, I don't give a fuck. Tough, straight through. The whole like
you push it,
dude. There's that one song, Bud or so Sweat of the Bud.
Oh yeah,
that shit is fucking sick, dude.
Dude, I could riff on that.
Those are like there's like. I'd say like 5 new metal, like I wouldn't even say bands, because like all those bands fell off later on. Like their first 3 albums or 2 albums are disgusting and great, and then like they got just really like I don't know what happens to a lot of them, but a lot of them got really kind of shitty as they continued making music. But I will say like a couple of those bands, their first, second album, great. Still to this day, you can listen to them now, and they're phenomenal in the world of, I guess, new metal and not butt rock, because butt rock's a whole other fucking genre. I don't listen to any of that stuff, so I have no idea. I let Chris school me on butt rock. I didn't even know that was a term until like a year or 2 ago. I was like,
we learned that on the show too. Yeah, we learned that on the show from our heavy metal intern Russell, who is my gateway to a lot of the newer stuff that's going on. So a lot of the new metal bands that have come up now in tribute to the older ones we found through Russell. And I heard butt rock from them, and I was like, what the fuck is that? And he's like, oh yeah, like anything but only rock, or like nothing but rock, and that's where it comes from. I'm like, oh, all right, I get it. So Crossfade and Creed. Oh
God, Chris is my Chris here on Haunted Hangover. He's a fucking Creed. He loves Creed, and I fucking make fun of him about it all the time. Oh, dude, it's so bad. I'm sorry. I just don't get even people that listen to that shit ironically. I'm like, really? Okay, whatever. To each his own. Don't want to yuck anyone's yum, I guess. Now, to transition, you mentioned horror, makeup, and stuff like that. Obviously, Haunted Hangover, Halloween, horror, very important. I haven't asked someone this question in a long time. I know you love Halloween. You're wearing a Creepshow shirt, so obviously you like horror. Why is Halloween and horror important to you? Why is it a personal sort of, why is it part of your identity?
So I count myself fortunate enough that I, like how my dad introduced me to a lot of the music that I love and the foundations that I had musically, he also introduced me to horror. So I remember one day my brother and I are watching the world premiere of Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island, as you did as a 90s kid. And my dad's watching it with us, and he goes, wow, this music is really good. This reminds me of this movie called Return of the Living Dead. So he sits my brother and I, who are probably 8 and 4 years old, and tells us the whole story of Trioxin and the Tar Man and all of this. And my mom is like, yeah, that was one of our first dates. Can you believe that? He took me to McDonald's afterwards. Can you believe I married this guy? So he introduced me to Return of the Living Dead, which is now one of my absolute favorite movies, and the music in that and how it really did kind of get tributed in Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. And then so it became something where we could talk about that with my dad and have our like family time around horror. And then I remember when they did the big 2-night event rescreening of it on Sci-Fi Channel. We watched that with him. And again, like we were way younger than maybe we should have been to be watching this stuff. But then came my discoveries of like The Outer Limits and Creep Show. You know, if you grow up in New York, TNT and TBS were rotating those constantly when we were kids. So it was super easy to access. And for me, it was just something that I always enjoyed watching. And now the thing that really, really stuck with me and made me feel like, all right, this is going to be a genre that I'm loving forever was during the summers when I was a kid, I would visit, my family's from El Salvador. And so we would visit during the summers for a few months. And I was sitting in the living room with my cousins and An American Werewolf in London was on TV. And I walk in during the transformation scene. Oof. So here's David yelling in Spanish, and he's turning into a werewolf, and I'm like, is this real? It just stuck with me. And mind you, like my dad's house where we were visiting has this enormous courtyard with chicken coops and stuff, and you would just hear the chickens going crazy in the middle of the night, and I'm going, oh my God, there's a werewolf back there. So it was things like that, and I do have to credit Primer Impacto, which thanks to Univision gave me my fear of the Chupacabra. It taught me about El Puerto del Diablo, like all of that stuff. Like any Hispanic growing up in New York, you had Univision and you're watching with your grandparents, and you're like, here, there's no filter on Hispanic news shows. Dude. So they're showing you dead bodies in Puerto Rico, and you're like, the Chupacabra did that? All right, I'm going to stay away from it in Queens, New York, where I'm from.
Dude, I remember growing up. I'm glad you mentioned this. I remember growing up, my grandma, because I'm Puerto Rican. I was born here, but I'm Puerto Rican. My grandma, obviously, she was born in Puerto Rico. She came here when she was in her 30s, I think, in like the 60s. And growing up, obviously, those channels would play all the time. They'd be on 24/7. I don't think it was 41 and 47, back and forth between those two here in New York. And dude, that show was terrifying at times. I don't know what
that was our Unsolved Mysteries.
Dude, it was weird because you're right. They would show like people dead and like they would
just
talk
people
about
disemboweled.
They would go from like something that was real to aliens. It made no sense. It would like this haunted house and then like a serial killer or like these or like it was just a very strange show. And I remember Chupacabra was really prominent in the mid-late 90s on that show. I'm so glad you mentioned that. And you mentioned watching American Werewolf in London in Spanish, which I remember watching. I think it was a Friday the 13th 3, first time, if I remember correctly. This was a long time ago. Entirely in Spanish, and seeing the commercials. It was a different experience. Like those terrible dubs that they
it's great.
It was ridiculous. It would make the movie comedic. There was something scary about it because you have this person like even the screams were like dubbed over, dubbed in Spanish a scream. But yeah, dude. So
dude,
good.
The amount of hours that I've watched of Family Matters in Spanish where Urkel is like, "Eso fue yo." It's like, no, dude, come on,
dude. You don't even know. Like at one point in your life, you had no idea that there were even English versions. Like they were just Spanish dubs of all this stuff.
Dragon Ball Z. I thought it was a Spanish show.
That's amazing, dude. You know what? I need to rewatch, and my Spanish is horrendous. I will admit, I don't. Speak
Mine is pretty choppy.
Well. Listen, Puerto Rican, born from New York. I think I've joked on the show before. We don't know Spanish, man. We know a couple words. We understand most of it, but don't speak it very well.
Yeah.
You mentioned like memories and that was a really good one, and you sparked something in me, which is fantastic. But what about Halloween memories? Does anything stand out to you?
Oh man, just the old school Halloween. The decorations that we had back then, the fact that it was very openly like celebrated in school, and that we all got to dress up during class and stuff. And like my family was never big on Halloween, like funny enough, because my parents were both like pretty religious. So my dad didn't really like dressing us up as like monsters and stuff. He'd rather paint us up in kiss makeup. But
like that's any better.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Dress me up as the 6-foot demon.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the ability to celebrate and have that kind of culture, and just as soon as the leaves start turning colors and the weather starts getting a little bit crisper, like I've got like 3 playlists on my phone where it's like retro Halloween, which is all like surf rock type Halloween music, the Coffin Daggers and Los Straight Jackets, the Ghastly Ones, bands like that, to Party on Boo Street, where I'm from. So like all types of things to just kind of get me in the mood whenever the season strikes and just make me feel like it's Halloween. So yeah, it's just something that I really hold dear, and I'm glad that like it's not thankfully with the age of the internet, you realize that it's not an isolating incident. It's not something that it's not just you. We've all had that sort of experience, and you get to connect with other people that way. I've been able to make friends across the country who are like, wow, I have a similar experience to that, or yeah, I checked out that band from that movie too. And it's such a uniting thing. So that's why I love Halloween. It's an outlet for a lot of these other things that we love, be it music, be it movies themselves. But that's kind of the epicenter for it all.
Is there, like, since your father didn't, allow you to dress up as any monsters, or I'm guessing like killers, like there was no Freddy Krueger costume growing up, was there a turning point? Because it's always interesting to me when I've had people, on the show as guests before, where growing up, they had religious parents that didn't allow them, but there was sort of like a point in their life where there was a curve where it's like, all right, I'm doing what I want. Is there an age where you were just like, I'm going to dress up as a killer this year? Like, was there a certain age where that happened?
I was 15 and I dressed up as Wayne Static on the back cover of the Machine album.
Yep. Amazing.
So I used to spike up my hair just like Wayne Static, or do like Liberty spikes when I was a kid. And I would get out of the bathroom and my dad would be like, you wash that stuff out of your hair right now. I'm not taking you to church dressed like that. And I'm like, come on, I just got my Jenkos on and I did my hair. And he's like, no, fuera.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, that was that Halloween where I got a straight jacket and I dressed up as Wayne Static. I got the little, like, I drew the beard on and stuff like that. And I spiked my hair up and I was like, yeah, this is it. And my dad just like looked at me and just kind of laughed. And he's like, all right, like that was where he kind of like let the reins go. And I think the year before that, I got a Frankenstein mask. I've always had that connection to Frankenstein, hence the stage name John von Frankenstein. But,
I never did like the nu metal costume. I think I should do that now as a grown man, like as a joke, just like dress up as someone from 1999, 2000, wear like 50 chains, UFO pants.
Be Chino Moreno.
Yeah, maybe.
Deftones, dude,
Deftones still sick. Dude, I still listen to the first like 5 Deftone albums in 2025. One of my favorite bands. They're fucking, when it comes to like nu metal, Deftones, they aged gracefully kind of in the music. There was no one else that kind of, I know a lot
they
of
were
people
lumped in together with the genre. They were just lumped in. They're a victim of the time that they came out, and sort of like Alice in Chains. I don't consider them a grunge band. I consider them like a hard rock or a metal band. But they got lumped in with grunge because they just came out at the same exact time.
Deftones are sick, man. So good. Mm-hmm. So I'll never understand people that don't like them, but whatever, to each his own.
Yeah.
All right. So on the topic, we mentioned horror, Halloween, metal, bands. Mm-hmm. I thought it would be fun, since I'm having you on the show, to discuss some of our favorite horror, and I'm going to just lump in parentheses Halloween, because I think more so in my picks, there's some one of yours. There's some Halloween references in there, specifically to the holiday, themed bands or musicians. Yeah. So it can be, this is an ongoing series I wanted to do. I've had this idea for a while, because there are some bands, and it's all taste, it's preference, it's all, subjective, it's what you'd like. Yeah. But there's been bands that I've wanted to talk about that kind of use horror and Halloween to kind of, whether it's their lyrics or their appearance or their music videos, whatever. So it's an idea I've had that why not start this with you, since you have a show about metal and heavy music and stuff. It makes sense. Perfect first guest for this new series of episodes I'm going to start doing from time to time. But yeah, John, since you're the guest, hit me with your first pick.
Sure. So my pick is the band Silent Horror and their album Silver Screen. These guys really pay tribute to some of my favorite horror punk bands, and they do it in a way where it's like it doesn't feel repetitive or like they are just recycling what has come before. It's definitely an homage to, and they know not to overstay their welcome. There are a lot of bands now in metal that do like the horror thing, not to name names, but I feel like and I say that because of my feelings towards them.
There's one band that's very popular. Terrible. I'm not going to say the name either. They are.
We'll talk about it afterwards.
They are. Personally, I'm just like, this is some corny shit. And I like some corny stuff, but this is like beyond corny.
Oh, yeah.
Continue, sorry.
So when you get into being so serious about your gimmick and being so serious to the point of like, I'm going to dress up as this character, or I'm going to theme a whole entire album around this one particular character, to me, it kind of like gets away from the fun of being able to step into different shoes and different characters with each song, right? That's what you're doing. You're taking us along for a story. So where I love the Misfits for their unabashed love of 50s B movies, Silent Horror really hits home on every single possible classic, like Universal and B movie horror on this album, Silver Screen. And it's just a tribute to those Halloween staples. You know, they talk about King Kong, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, London After Midnight, Creature from the Black Lagoon. That was the first song I heard from them. So I had a Halloween playlist on in September, as you do. And I heard their Creature from the Black Lagoon. It's 1 and 47 seconds of just 3 chords and attitude. And I was like, this is great. This is exactly what I needed, because I struggle to find stuff like along the lines of someone like the Murder Dolls, where it's like they're singing about some Halloween elements and some horror movie elements in a really, really fun and tongue-in-cheek way. They also have a song about Psycho. It's just called Psycho. It's 1 and 15 seconds. And it's told from the point of view of Norman and his mother. And they go back and forth within the same verse. And it is wicked to keep up with the lyrics when you're singing along in your car. It's just so much fun. And I really, really dig them. They've got a couple albums out there that are really good. They've got one all about different serial killers as well. I know some people are into true crime, so there's some thoughts on that too. But, you know, to each their own again. But yeah, and they also have a song called, I think, Space Creeps from Space or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Astro Creeps from Space. There you go. I knew that.
I feel like every one of these bands have an Astro Creep something song.
Oh, yeah.
Every single one.
Every song's got to be 3 chords. Every song's got to be a whoa.
Yeah.
You know, it's got to have something like that.
It's so weird, this genre of music. So I'll be very real with you, John. I'm not a huge fan of like the horror punk scene because I'm a big Misfits, like Danzig era Misfits fan. I'll say it's funny.
That's the only era, my friend.
That is the only era.
That's the correct era.
That is the right era. Yes, if you're listening to the Misfits, that's the era you're supposed to listen to. But I think that's kind of, we all mutually agree. It's like, that is the Misfits.
Yeah.
But there are people that love, and they do have a couple of decent songs, like Michael Graves era Misfits.
Right.
A lot of these bands sound like that era of the Misfits to me.
Yes.
And I'm not a huge fan of that era of the Misfits. There's, again, Dig Up Her Bones. Who doesn't like that song? It's a great song. Doesn't like John likes that song. But like, that's a catchy song. But I'm not a huge, again, in general, I'm not a huge fan. Like the what's the name of that album? Famous Monsters. I'm not a big fan of that.
Right.
But all these bands, for some reason, sound like that era of the, not even like old, like Glenn Danzig, because I don't think anyone can. I think if you're doing a Glenn Danzig voice, it's obvious.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like if you're trying to like to mimic Glenn Danzig.
Oh yeah.
And just to me, like that, I don't know. There's just something weird about it. And there's a couple of bands that are doing it okay. Like I think Blitzkid's a band that's been around forever.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people like them. They're okay. They're not
Yeah.
terrible. I've actually seen them live before, and I know people that are like that know them and stuff that are in other bands. It's a very small community, that horror punk community.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. It's just a weird genre of music, and there's a genre when I get to my first pick here that kind of is in that same realm, but very separate. It's
Yes.
very bizarre.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's just like this band's pretty good. There's a lot of bands that kind of like, there's a band called, I think, The Other that sounds like them.
Yes. Yeah.
And they're okay. It's just I don't know. It doesn't resonate with me for some reason. I can't, like, I listened to these guys. I heard of them. I listened to the Psycho song. That was, I think, the first one I listened to. Their stuff is catchy. I'm not gonna front.
Yeah.
And it is perfect for a Halloween playlist. They're not a bad band. I would never say like,
Yeah.
oh, these guys are trash. They're corny. They suck. They don't. I get the appeal. But just the whole genre of music, that whole like horror punk.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's something overproduced about it to me. I don't know what it is.
So that's exactly what I feel about a band like Ice Nine Kills, which is so overproduced.
Yeah.
But I understand, and again, it's a gateway. It's not for me. I'm not a fan.
I'm glad we're on the same page with those guys. No offense to them.
No offense to them, and this is me being way kinder than I am on my show.
Oh, okay.
But but I get the appeal, and I get that if you've never listened to heavy music and this is your first time listening to heavy music and you're a fan of horror movies, you're like, this is perfect. I can listen to this very digestible, very approachable heavy metal that's singing about horror movies.
Yeah.
So that's your gateway in. And then from there you can find the misfits. But you're right. Everyone's for the vast majority of the bands within this genre, they are actually doing tributes to the Graves era, where I like the Danzig era, and I like the deep gravelly voice. I like the Elvis kind of ripoff, and it gives kind of that rockabilly feel when you listen to the Glenn Danzig era. And it makes sense when you really realize that all he wanted to do was write some rock and roll songs that tributed Elvis. He thought he was a comic book accurate Wolverine singing in an Elvis voice.
Yeah.
And as a short king myself, I can appreciate that.
Yeah, man. I like I said, I get it. It's. I feel like if you love the Misfits and you love whatever, Blitzkid and there's like fucking so
Calabrese. Calabrese is great.
Oh, no, I'm not a big fan of theirs either. There's just some like it's. You know what it is, and listen. There's a band on. There's bands I like, and they're a different genre of music that are very on the nose with what they're talking about.
Yeah.
There's just something too. Like this too on the nose. I'm also someone that tends to lean towards more like the less produced lo-fi kind of simplistic nature.
The DIY stuff of the original Misfits.
Like when it comes to music, and I like a lot of my heavy stuff when it comes to my taste in music, and I love big bands too that obviously have money and millions to throw at a record.
Yeah.
But I don't know, there's just something with these, like some of these bands, these like horror punk bands and some other genres, but it's too on the nose, too overproduced. It's like, all right, you're on stage wearing a Freddy Krueger sweater. It's too obvious. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's too obvious.
Yeah.
You're up there. One guy's dressed as like a killer
cringy.
clown. One guy's up there wearing a hockey mask. It's like
Yeah.
It's a little bit too much for me. Okay,
Yeah.
you like those movies. So do I.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I have a whole fucking show. I'm involved in horror. I've written movies that got made about slasher guys and stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, I get it, but it's just like, I don't know. When it comes to music and heavy music, it's just not my taste. It's just a little too much going on there. A little too much on the money with what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Calabrese is like that too. I think I've listened to them a couple times. They have like one or two decent songs.
Yeah.
But again, when I watch one of their music videos, I'm like, all right, this is too obvious.
Yeah.
this
is their producer saying, we have to remind everyone that you're a horror punk band.
You guys think you're vampires. Get on stage.
Yeah.
So, all right. That takes me to my first pick. This is a good little place to transition. So my first pick, and this goes to what I said before, how these two kind of scenes are both the same and separate in a way, because they don't you don't ever see people that are like into both. I also am from New York, where I don't think either scene, like we're both from New York, like I don't think either of these scenes are huge here.
Yeah.
You don't see, it's like more like a
sure.
West Coast, California, I feel huge. And my first pick is the Nekromantix. Now, I will be 100. I'm not a big Psychobilly guy. I'm not. I can name the Psychobilly guy, like bands I like, one hand. Like maybe even have digits still. Like it's not something I listen to that often either. But I remember discovering these guys, I don't know, I was maybe 19, hanging out in the village and going to like Generation Records and like picking up one of their CDs, and it was like $7. And I was like, oh, this looks like Nosferatu, like The Shadow, and like them. It's kind of cool. Nekromantix, what the hell is this about? At that point in my life, which will play into my next pick, I was listening to a lot of like, you know, between the age of like 15 to like 25, I was very close-minded. So, you know, I was listening to heavy music and like really heavy shit and horror movies and things like that and discovering foreign weird shit. So I was like, all right, Nekromantix. And when I listened to this, I was like, what the fuck is this shit? Like, what am I listening to? So Nekromantix is a psychobilly act from Denmark, founded by, I believe his name is Kim Necroman. It's his band. He pretty much is the only consistent member. It's his baby, basically.
Yeah,
He's the one. Funny enough, both my picks, it's one person and everyone else has been interchangeable member-wise. And he's had constant members. And he's also probably the sole songwriter, I'm assuming, pretty much. So the band's signature kind of look and what I noticed when I first discovered them and kind of what I was like, oh, that's kind of cool was, so he plays an upright bass, which is kind of, it's popular with Psychobilly, but it's a coffin bass. And when I was looking into it and reading about it more, this guy like built his own, because they don't sell coffin basses. He made his own upright coffin bass, I think using like a children's casket. It's fucking morbid. It's wild. He got a kid's like casket and turned it into an upright bass. And then he's got like the flat top, which I think is the other thing most people, you know, you mentioned Wayne Static and the hair, and that's kind of what the flat top reminds me of.
Yeah.
So when I saw all these visuals, I was like, what is this? And this is all new to me. I have never heard, you know, when I was young, you know, 18, 19, I had never heard of Psychobilly. And I saw the logo. It was like a coffin, Nekromantix. So I was like, oh, this seems kind of cool. It's very minimalist in the design and the shirt and in the album covers. So I checked it out, and what I like about them is, and when you listen to Psychobilly, you know, you mentioned like Rockabilly and Elvis. Nekromantix is more like, what if you took Motorhead and mixed it with Rockabilly and horror movies, obviously. And Halloween. And that's what they sound like. They're screaming. It's very fast. It kind of has like the rhythms of like old school Motorhead, especially like that first album, like first 2 or 3 albums. And that's what I liked about them. There was an element of kind of like heavy music mixed into Psychobilly, you know? And I love that. And I found out about like Horror Pops, which was like his other band with his wife, which is not like Nekromantix. It's very much a popular version of what Kim Necroman is doing with Nekromantix, and she's singing now. She's playing the upright bass, and I think he's playing guitar, and they're writing the songs together. So, you know, that's kind of what I always liked about them. They just seem like it's like a heavier Psychobilly band. Now, if I had to pick 3 songs that I'd recommend, if any of the listeners, if you're not familiar with Nekromantix, I'd say these 3 kind of better, it can articulate better what I'm trying to say when you listen to them. So Who Killed the Cheerleader? Great song, really popular. Like I think it's one of their more popular songs. I think if you go on Spotify, it's like the first one you see, because I feel like the speed of that song, the lyrics, it's called Who Killed the Cheerleader? Very kind of 50s-esque there. Next song, Curse of the Coffin, another one, really kind of fast song, and they all have like bass solos because he's playing the bass. It's funny, you hear the upright bass more than the guitar in every Nekromantix. It's almost like Korn but
Right,
with an
right.
upright bass. Like you
Yeah.
hear that bass really prominent. But yeah, Curse of the Coffin, banger. And then I had to pick this one because it's Haunted Hangover, Trick or Treat, which is a later song, I believe, from a later album. And the two albums I'd recommend, Return of the Living Dead from 2001 and Dead Girls Don't Cry from 2004, which was the first album I picked up from them. So '04 was, I saw it, and that was the one with like the Nosferatu kind of shadow on the wall.
Yeah.
I think the three of them are on there. What's your feelings towards Nekromantix? What are you feeling about them?
My introduction to them was through the horror pops. And so I remember like, doing the same sort of thing where you're in that sort of elitist age when you're between 15 and 25, where the only the music that you listen to is good.
Yes.
It's everyone else's music taste sucks. You're the only one with good developed music taste when you're in that stage. So I'm walking through like FYE. My buddy and I used to just take the bus from school, which I went to school out in the Rockaways, and then take the train and the bus all the way to Queens Center Mall, and we would just loiter in FYE all day long.
I remember that FYE that you're talking about.
Oh my God. They hated us there because they would see us coming, and it was almost like the Wayne's World skit where they were like, please get away from the kiosk. We know you're just going to pick up the same 4 albums, listen to the samples again, and then put it back. So I'm walking through and I see the CD for the horror pops, and I'm like, she's on the cover with this with the upright bass, and I'm like, this is awesome, because I liked the aesthetic. I love the look of like rockabilly and horror punk because of the like the 50s elements that you get to it. The pompadour, the flat top, like the skirts and stuff like that. It's all very like Grease sort of looking.
It's like a spooky Grease, basically. It's a good way of describing
exactly.
it.
Yeah. If Grease was set in October as opposed to right after the summer when Danny comes back. So yeah, I really liked them, and I love that sort of popcorn guitar, like the upright bass, the railroad kind of drum, kind of feel to it. But yeah, they're a lot of fun. Horny in a Hearse was great too.
Yeah, that's a good song too. It's fun. All their songs, honestly, like every song is either about, it's basically like horror movies, monsters, Halloween, the macabre, but then they mix it in with like relationships and dating and love. Yeah. It's tongue in cheek, obviously, when you listen to it.
They are basically, if your listeners have ever seen, I'm sure they have, the Phantom of the Paradise. If they've seen that, and then the band that they tried to turn Winslow's music into, was it the Juicy Fruits?
Yeah,
it's pretty much if the Juicy Fruits were a real band, would be Nekromantix. And it's so much fun. It really is. And like you said, it's the ability to be tongue-in-cheek, but also take your music seriously, where it's like, then you're having fun with, now I can have fun with you, as opposed to being like, right, you're in a Freddy Krueger sweater. I get that you like, it's what I say about black metal, like black metal bands. I love black metal bands, but the reason that they get memed on and clowned on so much is because they take the music so seriously.
They take themselves way too
serious. They want to push out there that they're Satanists, and the reason that I love Ghost is because they're just one guy writing all the music with his like songwriting partners or whatever, and he's able to be like, yeah, I'm a satanic pope, and we're a satanic band, and we get to sing from it in a very tongue-in-cheek way. It allows you to have fun. You're in on the joke with them, but they're still taking what they do very, very seriously and do it very, very well. So somewhat more produced, but it's to fit whatever era they're in.
Yeah, Nekromantix is what I like about them is they're not like a show. I've seen them live maybe 2 times. And like I said, I'm not a psychobilly or horror punk guy like your first pick, but seeing them, it's very like the upright coffin bass is the star of the show. Like this inanimate object that's on stage. They wear all black. It's very simple, and they're still a kind of they're a small band. They've been around for like 30 years or something crazy like that. Which is wild to me. They still play small bars and venues, and every time I've seen them, it's been like a small place. And I appreciate that. I'm sure they don't appreciate that. I'm sure they want to be a huge band, but I just love kind of the minimalist approach to this music because, a lot of these psychobilly bands are very showy, and that's, again, not my style. So it's like, that's what I dig about them. And obviously the fun nature of the music. And it's a vibe. I've got to be in the mood to listen to Nekromantix. I'm gonna be like, it's not like I just have them on. I gotta like be in the mood. Okay, I'm gonna listen to some of these like necromantic records. It's something I have to like prep myself to. But they are, in my opinion, the best Psychobilly band to me.
So my next pick, when we talk about production, I don't think you get more produced than this. So in the same way that I love punk music and I love horror movies and I love heavy metal, I also love dance music. As Static X is an example. Evil Disco rules my life. But I don't dance well, but it's in my blood and it makes me move. So anytime I can find something that has a really cool danceable beat, or any sort of like techno or house element to stuff like that, even like lo-fi, new school, neo R&B, I love that stuff. And in the same way that I love horror movies, I love the 80s synth soundtracks. I love John Carpenter. I love the sound of those movies and the look of something with lots of neon, obviously. So when I first found Dance with the Dead, it was actually a remix that they had done of the Gremlin Rag that I found on YouTube. And so I've yet to be able to confirm that it's actually them, or if someone just uploaded their version of the Gremlin Rag and was like, this sounds kind of like Dance with the Dead. So I'm just going to title it that. But it was that and their version of the Freddy Krueger theme. Okay. The main theme. Bum, 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 bum. That to a dance beat. Dude, I am beating up the beat the whole night. But their first album, Out of Body, is the perfect thing to listen to when you're on a long drive. It's now towards the end of October. Halloween is quickly approaching. The moon is high in the sky, and you're just driving off into the sunset. So that's what this album feels like to me. It has so much synth, and there's guitars in there too, because these guys, Tony and Justin, are both, they're coming at this from having been in metal and metalcore bands. And then they were like, you know what? We both love synth. We both love horror movies. So let's mix the two and now have those elements pushed through. So you've got a lot of really cool ripping guitars along with the synths and along with the drum machines. And now whenever they play out live, they actually bring a touring drummer with them. So you've got live guitars, live drums, and the synth tracks that are going on. And their shows are very, very flashy. They'll have horror movies playing in the background. They've got these giant skulls with smoke coming out of the mouths. If I had to give the listeners 3 songs to listen to, off of the album Out of Body would be the song Row Beast and Blind. And then off of the album The Shape, which came out in 2016, is the song Riot, because it just starts out with this drum solo and then break, a big snare hit, and then just that wow, like this girl screaming, and then dude, it's like Static X on steroids. And then you've got like a friend in the corner just going like, doing one of those, like Raven in front of you. Yeah.
I agree. Out of Body is probably their best album. I like that song Mr. Terror. That's probably my favorite one.
Mr. Terror
on that album.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, I much like horror punk and Psychobilly, I have a weird, it's come up on the show. So one of my Dave, who I started the Haunted Hangover podcast with, he's a composer. He writes music, and we've had the synthwave discussion. Johnny Louvers, aka Johnny, aka Louvers. Shout out to Johnny. He's been on the show before. Another friend of mine. He writes kind of synthy, like nostalgia 80s based music.
Yeah.
I same feeling as kind of those bands. It's like a lot of these groups, I think their early stuff is really good. Mm-hmm. Like Out of Body is a good album. When you get to the new stuff, it's just too much for me going on. Mm-hmm. I joke around all the time, like with synthwave. Like there's it's like I'll like 1 or 2 songs, but I can't listen to a whole album. It's like, this is gonna be weird. I don't like all the sax stuff.
Oh. Dude, I love the sax stuff.
I know I'm in the minority. It's a hot take there. I just don't like it. I like the sax stuff when I'm watching something like back in the day. It's like an 80s movie that I'm watching. And like when a movie does it an homage. Like there's this one band, I forget their name. I don't like them. Nothing against them. They're talented musicians. There's too much. There's like a sax player in the band. I don't know what they're called. I don't remember.
It's either Gunship or Power Glove, because Gunship actually I think it's Gunship. they have a couple of songs with Tim Capello, aka the sax man
from Lost Boys.
From the Lost Boys.
Yeah.
I still believe.
Yeah. I don't know what it is, dude. I have like a weird I don't know what it's hard to explain. It's hard to don't.
No, I get what you mean.
Yeah.
It's so with
here's a funny thing. I've talked about it on the show. My favorite synthwave act is Survive.
Okay.
It's very minimalist, slow.
I gotta check them out.
You never heard of Survive, really?
No.
So that's like I'd say Survive. I'm being redundant here. As we've had this conversation on the show. Survive, I really like. I think Carpenter Brute's first 3 EPs are great.
Yeah.
But then they kind of evolved into like this, like their covers look like horror movie T-shirts, like it's just I'm not like where they
gets
went.
very on the nose.
Yeah, like the first EPs was like a picture of a church, like like a real photo of like a grainy photo of a church. And then now it's like a zombie driving a car. And I'm like, all right, guys. Like, that's where you lose me. That's where you lose Louis. They're still very talented. I will never say they suck because they don't. Yeah. I do like some of their stuff. But yeah, like Survive, huge Survive guy. I think Perturbator, early on, very good.
Yeah.
Very good. And that guy comes from black metal. I've talked about Perturbator on the show. So those are kind of like the synth wave or whatever the fuck you want to call it.
Yeah. Dark wave, synth wave, whatever.
Synth wave. But Dance of the Dead is good. I'll say, I say like them and Carpenter Brute are probably like the big synth wave, dark wave, whatever the hell they've evolved into. They've evolved from like 2 dudes with keyboards and like mixing shit to like guitars and drummers and you know, there's some good stuff. But I will say Dance of the Dead is probably one of the acts to make it a big deal, you know, and they do put on good performance. I've seen Perturbator. I've never seen Dance of the Dead, but I have seen Perturbator live. He puts on a good show. And I've seen Carpenter Brute live. I actually think I saw them like 2 or 3 years ago. They put on a good show too. I'm a weirdo. I don't know. It's just
no, I get it. I get where it's like if it's too on the nose and it's too redundant, or it's too like you're obviously trying to get me to feel nostalgic for the Lost Boys. So now you've thrown a saxophone solo in there. The Midnight is another band that I absolutely adore, which is on the synthwave kind of end of things, and they've got sax solos all over their albums. Their song Crystalline. Oh man,
I know who they are. I don't think I've ever listened to them. Maybe I have. I don't know.
I think for me it's more the production side of my brain that's like, oh cool, how do you do that?
Oh, no,
cool.
these guys.
How do I get those sounds?
These guys are talented, dude.
What mics are they using to do this, and like what reverb units or plugins are they using for it? I think there's that side of my brain too that it kind of examines music in that way. So and again, anytime there's a good beat, I'm gonna just get up and dance like a fool, like an absolute fool.
Yeah.
I look like Terry Crews in White Chicks, where it's like, doo, 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 every time.
Dude, check out Survive. I mean, it's a little more minimalist, and that's probably, again, it goes back to just my taste in what I like, I think. Even though I think Perturbator probably falls more in line with like Dance of the Dead and what they're doing. I don't know, it's just a certain...
I don't mind minimalist. I've thrown on Sun-O while I'm driving around, and it's just...
Survive's really... I think Survive, what sucks is they have like 2 albums and like an EP, and that's it. Oh, here's... Survive. The 2 guys that score score Stranger Things. They're from Survive. They're from Survive. Those guys are from Survive. So
nice.
I was like brain fart. I was like, how would you know them? Stranger Things. So the guys that score Stranger Things, 2 of the dudes are in Survive. You know what it is? I'm a huge Kraftwerk fan. So it's like Survive is like Kraftwerk almost without lyrics.
Yes. Okay. Cool.
So like it's I just like the kind of minimalist, like they're actually using keyboards.
Yeah.
And
you got to check out our industrial episode, my friend.
I'm gonna have to listen to that one then, man. Yeah, like, I'm just like one of those guys that just when it comes to a certain sound that I like, that's what I like. And these guys are good. Don't get me wrong. I do like some of it, but as it's like when they're like on their 5th album, it's like, all right, guys.
Yeah, it's like how much more can you do it?
You're just shitting these albums out because it's gonna get you.
The perfect thing is give us 2 albums, an EP, and then break up.
Yes.
Do the hardcore thing. Yes. Come out with an EP, announce that you're going on tour, and then fucking break up.
Like realistically,
that's how you become legendary.
Before I go into my the next pick, the last pick we're gonna talk about here. Can you listen to that type of music for like 3 hours?
I can, because I'm not a lyrics guy.
Okay. Interesting.
I don't listen. I listen for melodies and beats.
Okay.
I am not a lyrics person, and my favorite bands. If you ask me, like, what are the lyrics to this song by Ghost? What are the lyrics to this song by Kubla Khan? Maybe I'll like Kubla Khan because I've dug into those lyrics before.
You've listened to it so much, it's like you can't help it. Yeah.
Not only, but even bands that I've listened to. You ask me for Limp Bizkit lyrics, I know them just because I've watched the music videos so many times. But like my absolute favorite bands, I don't know any words because they're either screaming, they're too fast, or I just don't pay attention unless it's like a big call out line.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Rotting Out has a song called Reaper. I know the part where Wally goes, "Time to die." And that's it. Because that's the part where I'm like, I stop everything and I'm like, hold on, let this part play. Time to die. And then I'm like, okay, go on.
So my second pick and the last band musician we're going to be talking about here is near and dear to my heart because I remember being a teenager, and it kind of goes back to what I said before. I remember being a teenager and discovering shit, and when I discovered the most evil, like DIY, fucking weird band, you know, I just fell in love with them. And the band's Necrophagia. Like, when I've been listening to these guys since I was, I don't know, 14 years old.
Yeah.
So when I was Louis, 14-year-old Louis, heavy into death metal and grindcore, and heavy into horror movies. And at that point in my life, I was looking for like the most, and now I've said it on the show, I don't like real gore. I'm not like a Faces of Death guy, or, you know, I'm not one of those guys. Traces of Death. I hated execution videos. I still to this day do not like any of that stuff. But if it's fake, because obviously filmmaking was always my first love, and just kind of horror movies, I was always looking for like the craziest shit. And a lot of these bands were my gateway to these filmmakers and these films. So there's another band I'm not going to mention where I would listen to them and they'd have samples from movies and I would want to look into what those movies, and I was like 14, 15 years old.
Sure.
So Necrophagia, in my opinion, did that kind of horror, death metal. In my opinion, they did it the best. And I'm not talking like Cannibal Corpse or, you know, you've got different types. You've got like I'm only naming big bands because that's what everyone knows. So like Cannibal Corpse is like the gore stuff, Deicide, the Satan stuff, Dying Fetus, the political stuff, and like, you know, Suffocation, a combination of both. Like, you know what I mean? So like those bands didn't really focus on horror films per se, but were about like the gory Satan shit. Necrophagia literally is horror movies and the gore stuff.
Yeah.
And I learned about some of my favorite filmmakers. I learned about my first time learning of Lucio Fulci, I was 14, and it was The Beyond, and it was because of Necrophagia. My first time learning about like all the like Cannibal Holocaust, I was like 14 or 15 and working in a video store a little later in life and renting these films because of this band and the other band that shall not be named because I'm going to do them in a future episode. And they kind of opened my eyes to like Coffin Joe and all the like obscure shit that I would have never known about the Guinea Pig series if it was not for Necrophagia. So like for me, and being this kid renting these movies and trying to buy them at Kim's Video and all this stuff, this is the group that did it. Now, if you're not familiar with Necrophagia, some people, and this is an argument that people can have, I don't give a shit, I don't really care. Some people consider them one of the first death metal bands. Like they're one of the first to do the whole death metal thing. And it was their album Season of the Dead, which I believe was 1984. I may be wrong. I didn't write that in my notes. Sorry, guys. Quick Google search, you'll figure it out. But yeah, Season of the Dead, it was in the mid 80s. And they were founded by Killjoy. His name is Frank, I think it's pronounced Pucci or Pussy, Pucci is his name. But he went by Killjoy. Like, that's the guy. It was his band. He passed away in 2018 at like 50 years old. Bummer thing that happened there. Based out of Ohio. And since they're considered one of the first death metal bands, what's funny about them, and you mentioned like release 2 albums and break up. That's the thing to do. That's what happened to Necrophagia. They released Season of the Dead and then broke up and were gone for, I don't know, like over 10 years, over a decade. Didn't make any music. Necrophagia vanished. Then in 1997, Phil Anselmo, I guess he was friends with Killjoy, and they got to know each other or whatever. They became buddies. Convinced Killjoy to restart the band with him, but he couldn't. There was some like weird I guess with Pantera, he couldn't use his name, Phil Anselmo. There was some sort of contract issue, some lawyer shit we won't get into, where he couldn't take credit for helping write these albums. So he had like an Anton Crowley, like this stage name that he was using. So yeah, very on the nose, Anton Crowley. So Phil Anselmo, Killjoy, they released the album Holocausto de la Muerte and a couple of EPs specifically. My favorite is the Cannibal Holocaust EP, which is like 2 songs.
Yeah.
And Holocausto de la Muerte, it was like the first album to bring Necrophagia back into the limelight and, you know, and make them a band that people are talking about again. So Anselmo left the band around 2001, 2002, but Killjoy continued releasing music as Necrophagia until his death in 2018. Funny enough, they released an album last year that had some unreleased Necrophagia stuff, some like reworks of songs with someone else singing. But they're doing like the Killjoy. It was like an homage to Killjoy and Necrophagia. They had some decent stuff on it. But yeah, the band's done obviously because he was the founder. It was his band. Killjoy was the guy behind Necrophagia. And their sound sort of shifted from Seasons of the Dead, their first album, to like the Phil Anselmo era to the later years where the music was always about horror films and, you know, things of that nature, gore and things like that. But the sound did shift. You can tell the albums that Anselmo's on and then the albums after he left because he had different musicians helping him write music. Right. And I always love this band. You know, Killjoy's sound, his voice, very screechy. He sounds like a demon almost, like a very high pitch. There's some like growling there too, but like kind of screechy demon. I know it's not for everyone. I dug it. I enjoyed it. And dude, kind of the way they were able to incorporate later on keyboards into the music and kind of that goblin sound into metal, death metal, I think it worked perfectly. Their music is very on the nose as well. I will admit that. They are kind of, it's like blood, demons, Fulci worship.
Right.
You know, Mario Bava is the best. It's like very much and listen, when I'm 15, I felt the same way. Yeah. So like that's their music. My favorite songs are the ones I at least wrote down that I think best kind of represent them. There's a song called The Fog from there. It's an EP album called Goblins Be Thine. It's like 11 minutes long. And it's like this build up with just instrumental keyboards, this spooky, eerie sound and drums, and then the song starts with him singing. And You Will Live in Terror, which was my introduction to the band. I bought the Beyond and saw the music video for And You Will Live in Terror on the Beyond DVD. That's how I found out about them. That's where that's what I'm saying. That's why it's like they introduced me, like these bands, I learned about them from like Fulci and learning about these different filmmakers and stuff like that. Like I didn't even know they had a music video until like I saw the Beyond and I saw that music video. And I was like, oh, cool, Necrophagia. Rue Morgue Disciples is another good song. That's very on the nose. Rue Morgue, the magazine, like very early Rue Morgue. Yeah. And literally there's lyrics where he's breaking down. He literally names like 15 horror directors in the song. It's like Carpenter, Argento, Fulci, Bava, like literally very again on the money, on the nose. But listen, man, you know, Holocausto de la Muerte is a fantastic kind of death metal, horror, metal, death metal, whatever the fuck you want to call it, album. Goblins Be Thine, the one I mentioned, that's a great EP/album. It's like 6 tracks. The Divine Art of Torture. It's like basically a Coffin Joe themed album for the most part. Like Coffin Joe is in one of the music videos. Their music videos were great, very like DIY, low budget, shot on video, trash, but I love it. You know what I mean? And I've always loved Necrophagia. I still beat myself up to this day. I never got to see them live. They played in Brooklyn, I think, like a few years before he passed away. And I just couldn't make it. And I still love them, dude. I still listen to them to this day. Like, I know what they are. They've got songs that are really catchy, and I know that they're like kind of like horror, blood, gore.
Yeah.
But I'm very nostalgic for it because when I was 15, 14, in my teens, that was what I was all about. I wanted to watch shit like Men Behind the Sun, and these guys were singing about crazy ass movies. Real quick, Necrophagia, what did you ever listen to these guys at all?
So I didn't grow up listening to them.
Okay.
But like when you kind of sent me the notes and stuff, and I'm like, all right, I gotta try and get into these. As soon as I saw Coffin Joe on the cover, I'm like, oh, Brazil.
Yeah.
And what I loved was that they had, I don't know if it was an organ or a theremin going on in the background, but there's just something hitting these overtones. And I was like, is someone throat singing? Dude, that was the sickest thing because it literally had me like looking around while I'm listening in my headphones. I'm going like, what the hell is that? So I love music that like pulls you in that way, where you've got an unexpected element. Where again, for me, like, I wouldn't have noticed just how on the nose the lyrics are because I'm listening to it, and like a lot of times, especially with this style of music, any of the death metal bands and like black metal bands that I like, I hear the vocals as more of a percussive instrument because you're listening to how they're going along and delivering their lines and the rhythm that they're delivering the lines in, not necessarily the lyrics for me. So where like a band like this or a band like Cannibal Corpse, I'm like, yeah, it's and
could barely understand them honestly half the time.
So like unless I'm sitting there with the lyric sheet, I wouldn't know what they're singing about. So like kudos to you to be like, oh, Bava, okay, I can figure out that that's someone who I should check out. Let me jot that down. But I love when bands just know who they are and then say, all right, well, this is what we're going to write about. This is what we're going to reference. And this is what we're like. I love that even the cover for The Divine Art of Torture has this like Famous Monsters kind of look to it, like
it's like a Basil Go-Go style, like art.
Exactly.
The Coffin Joe there with like corpses in front of him.
Oh yeah, like a chick on the sacrificial altar, and she's got spiders all over her, and there's like torches on in the background. Dude, I love stuff.
Dude, they have 2 DVDs. I own both of them. Where Coffin Joe is like he bookends it like horror host style, and he's talking in like Portuguese the entire time. It's great, dude. Because I'm a big Coffin Joe guy. Thanks to Necrophagia, I love him, dude. I'll always love him. It's a bummer that he passed away young because they would have still made new music. I was curious what new shit, what new bloody gory shit you were gonna talk about. I'll always be if I had to name like a top 20 heavy death metal bands that are like would be on my list or top 10, they'd be very high on that list. I love them. They're great, man. I never get tired of listening to Necrophagia. So
and this is going to be a band now that I get to do a deep dive on and explore more.
Enjoy. I'm glad I reminded you of them because they're sick, man. If you like horror, if you like Halloween, if you like fucking gory stuff, Necrophagia's the shit. All right, John. Out of my 2 picks, which one do you prefer? Which one did you like more?
All right. So I'll be honest. I do love the rockabilly and psychobilly stuff. I wrote a song for another friend's podcast where they watch a movie and then write a song about it, each one of the hosts. Mm-hmm. So I wrote a song about American Werewolf in London, and it's got like that Johnny Cash kind of rockabilly feel to it. It's called Werewolf Train. And so for that, I really loved Nekromantix, but just Necrophagia is just so up my alley. I am a very simple, give me chuggy riffs, give me bloody gore, and I will listen kind of guy. So yeah, Necrophagia out of the 2 is going to be the one where I'm like, yup, doing a deep dive on this for sure.
Mine is gonna be Dance of the Dead. As that first album is really sick. That Out of Body album, I still like. The first, like you said, The Shape, I think, is the other one. Those albums are really good. I mean, I said my piece about synthwave many times in the show, so but I do dig it. I mean, listen, the other band's good too, but Dance of the Dead's probably more my flavor if I had to pick between the two. And I feel like, Halloween and horror, like they're kind of like a score to one of those movies, especially that Mr. Terror song. I could picture a woman being chased in like a building by a mass killer or something, it's very much the soundtrack to something like that. And that's kind of what I dig most about that genre of music. So those were some of our favorite horror or Halloween adjacent themed bands or musicians. John, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find you and Scrap Metal Podcast?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. This was so much fun. I really appreciate you inviting me on here. And your listeners can find me over on Instagram at John Von Frankenstein. You can find the Scrap Metal Podcast on Instagram at Scrap Metal Pod. And you can also find us on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube under The Scrap Metal Podcast. Make sure that you guys listen up. Right now, we're currently on a break, but there are something like 68 episodes that you can listen to. From episode 50 onward, we are on YouTube with our video element. My gracious co-host, my Metal Thrashing Mad co-host, Chris, puts together the videos for us. So definitely check us out there. We appreciate any new listeners and any new followers for sure.
And be sure to subscribe. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, I guess not TikTok. Blue Sky, at Haunted Hangover. Head over to hauntedhangover.com where you can find links to everything, including our Patreon page where you can find bonus content, get access to early episodes, and so much more. Rate and review us. We greatly appreciate it. And as always, remember, the best cure for a hangover is
more booze.
Catch you guys later.